Somebody tell me what we mean by the term critical period. Is that the final? When you're taking your final, that's the critical period? Or is this where all the guys get together in the dorm and they talk about how stupid Pastor Dameron is? The critical period? Don't do that, please. Go to Jacob's house if you're going to do that. Yes? Okay, the time we were ruled by the Articles, 81 to 89, 1781 to 1789. All right, and there we mentioned that as one of that really is kind of the underlying problem. On top of that is all the problems we would have faced anyway. The foreign problems, the economic problems, and then we talked about Shays' Rebellion, mostly just as an example of the sentiment that was building. All right, out of that comes a desire to fix the Articles. So I have this convention in 1787. That very quickly becomes a constitutional convention where they abandon trying to revise the Articles and just write a new constitution. All right, we get that out. Can somebody, it gets approved by all the states, eventually goes into effect. But in the process of it being approved, the Bill of Rights came up in the discussion some. Can anybody remind us about what happened with the Bill of Rights? Yes, Zach.
Some people were kind of scared of it because it listed specific rights rather than just leaving it free and open to whatever gets allowed.
Okay. Let me read you a quote here. This is Alexander Hamilton arguing about why there's no need for a Bill of Rights. This is in the Federalist Papers. I go further and affirm that bills of rights, in the sense they are being contended for, are not only unnecessary in the proposed Constitution, but would even be dangerous. They would grant certain various exceptions to power which are not granted, and on this very account could afford a pretext to claim more than were granted. For why declare that things shall not be done which there is no power to do? For instance, why should it be said that the liberty of the press should not be restrained when no power is given by which restrictions may be imposed? All right, so he's pointing out that dangerous side. You start making a list and then it calls into question anything that's not on the list. And if there are certain things the government can't do anyway, and we have another list saying they can't do them, does it then say, well, these other things they don't have power to do, but it's not on the list? So point out the danger. The flip side of that, I may not have mentioned a whole lot, the argument for the Bill of Rights. Anybody think of a reason why it would be good, or did I give it to you? I don't remember if we talked about it or not. So this one, most of us readily agree to because of the Bill of Rights. It's here. The basic argument for a Bill of Rights is that the government is going to always expand and take more power, and we need some clearly delineated boundaries. You cannot do these things. It's just the nature of government to spread and take more and more things. So we need this boundary line set up. Patrick Henry said this: "It is so in Great Britain, for every possible right which is not reserved to the people by some express provision is within the king's prerogative." All right, so anything that was not explicitly written down and reserved to the people, the king felt like he had the authority to take away. And that was, so maybe it's ISIS taking over the train and blowing it up. Wasn't that? Didn't you hear the screeching sound? Okay. All right, so the Bill of Rights, that comes up here in this time frame of approving the Articles, ratifying the Constitution, not approving the Articles. So, okay, questions about the Bill of Rights? Especially, I think, for a lot of people, the fact that good people, people that weren't stupid, and have, in lots of cases, very good thinking about things, argued against it. All right, the reason why it's dangerous, I think, is worth thinking about. So, as well as the reason why we need it. Both sides make a very valid point. All right, next topic. I think I've bitten off way more than we could possibly ever swallow today. Just that much. We'll never make it. So we'll see. What's that?
How many pages was that?
9. So, we'll see. The next thing I want to talk about is the separation of church and state. We have in our Constitution a statement regarding religion. Does anybody know what the Constitution actually says?
Isn't it that the state can't interfere with the church and political dealings?
The what, I'm sorry?
The state can't interfere with the church and its political dealings.
Okay, that's heading in the right direction. It says Congress can't pass any law respecting an establishment of religion or abridging the free exercise thereof. Okay, so it is, I know it's crazy to think we should read the Constitution, but it explicitly says Congress. It doesn't say the president, doesn't say state governments, doesn't say local governments. Now, the court, in their great and infinite wisdom, and I say that very much jesting, have just declared that the states also have to follow that. But there's nowhere in the Constitution. It's just the courts just saying, yeah, well, we think the state should also have to follow it. And that was not the original intent. The original intent was just Congress can't meddle with religion. Okay, and I want to look very, very quickly at how we get that in the Constitution and try to get a proper understanding of that amendment. It gets abused a lot. I mean, it's abused so bad that there's been kids in the public school in Chesterton who weren't allowed to pass out Christmas cards with Jesus on them because that would violate the Constitution. And that was the claim. Wouldn't it be fun to be a governor someday and do something that liberals say violates the Constitution and just say, wait, I'm not Congress. It's just Congress. If you want me to be Congress, there's some other things I'm going to do as well. But I'm not Congress. All right, separation of church and state. Let's talk about how this gets into the Constitution and what it, at least partly, really meant at that time. So, all right, first point, we've talked about some before, is that many of the colonies had a history of a combined church and state. Lots of people came to America for religious freedom, but unfortunately, a lot of people came for religious freedom for their religion. Right, they wanted to establish a place for Puritans to be safe, right? Not just general religious freedom. Now that changes, and by the time we get to the Revolution, most of the colonies and then states as they're formed completely disentangle religion and government. But there's that history of it. So one of the exceptions was Rhode Island. That was made a haven for anybody I think who expressed belief in the one true God or something to that effect. But most of them, it was some particular sect of Christianity was persecuted in Europe, and they came over and started a colony for that particular sect. So that changes. All right, next main point is by the time of the Revolution, we were down to just 2 states that had not disestablished religion. All right, the 2 were only 2. One of them was Massachusetts. They have a combined church and state to some extent until 1830. 41 years after the Constitution, 39 years after the First Amendment to the Constitution. There were some Baptists there that helped fight this thing. Anybody know a guy named Isaac Backus? Or at least that name? He helped fight for this. He dies before it comes about, but he helps fight for it. Okay, and then the other state was Virginia. They actually disestablished theirs just before the Constitution goes into effect. They get rid of theirs in 1786, but they actually have it up through the Articles and into the Article time frame. All right, let me just give you a little bit of detail there. In Virginia, one of the loud voices against the combined church and state of Virginia was the Baptists again, and a particular group was John Leland. I think I gave you his name when we talked about the Bill of Rights. It's the same group of Baptists there who said they would agree to the Constitution if we had a Bill of Rights in it. The same group of people here are resisting this established Anglican church in Virginia. And we're not going to go down through the whole history, but they slowly, over the course of 25 years or so, begin to see this church disestablished. Went from everybody paying taxes to the church, to you don't have to pay taxes, but you have to be a member to vote. Slowly those things are repealed away, and by 1786 we have Virginia disestablished in their religion. Patrick Henry actually came out. He was in favor of an established church. And he's got a very interesting twist on it. He felt that the government would collapse without the support of the church. He thought, he said, we need God to help prop up our government. Which at least I can appreciate that sentiment. We do need, wow, what a nice dream, the government collapsing. So, all right, anyway, Virginia had one up until 1786. So. All right, now how do we get this into the Constitution? We have that statement in the Constitution in the amendments. Congress can't pass any law respecting an establishment religion or abridging the free speech thereof. It came out of that fight in Virginia over the Bill of Rights, over the ratification. We had Virginia disestablishing religion in 1786. A year later, basically, is the debates about the Constitution. And those same Baptists, led by John Leland in Virginia, led the push to have an amendment added to the Constitution mandating that this new national government would not have the authority to ever pick a religion or prevent people from worshiping freely. All right? And it really was just aimed at that national government. Let me back up. The Baptists were at the principal ones behind it. There was enough Baptists there that whichever way they went would sway the election. They were the swing voters or the independent voters or whatever phrase liberals want to give them. They were the group in the middle that there was enough of them to make it go either way. So they were able to get with Madison here primarily and him agree to push for these amendments, and they support the Constitution, and we get that. So let me just briefly talk about what that amendment was really meant to say. All right, it says Congress can't pick an established religion. Shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So it would be a violation of the Constitution for Congress to say only Anglicans can be members of Congress. That would be a violation. Okay. It was meant to protect the right of states to do that. All right? It says Congress can't. It really intended, Massachusetts had a combined church and state until 1830. All right? It was not ever declared unconstitutional. It was meant to allow Massachusetts to pick a state religion if they wanted, or Virginia to pick a state religion if they wanted, and this national level had no authority to meddle with that. If Maryland wanted to say only Catholics can vote, then Maryland was free to do that. Okay, so it was the current twisting of that thing. I mean, it turns it upside down. It's used to force states and every locality to bow down to this thing. And that was not the intent. It was a restriction only on Congress, meant to protect the right of states to pick a religion. Well, that'd be another fight when you get to be governor. Proposed in the state legislature that only if you worship Allah, you're not allowed to vote. Maybe when you go to vote, you have to make some statement. Allah was a false prophet from the devil or something, and then you can go vote. And just watch the liberals scream, "Oh, violation of the Constitution," etc. No, it wouldn't. No, I don't think that'd be especially smart to do that. But it would not be a violation of the Constitution. It was explicitly meant to protect the right of states to come up with some religious test if they wanted. So anyway, the current thinking on it is so warped and twisted that I thought it was worth at least mentioning that. So, all right, questions about separation of church and state? Those of you in U.S. Constitution, we will read that amendment and talk about it again. The current liberal, well, come to U.S. Constitution, we'll talk about it. The current liberal interpretation of that thing, anyway, says the government can't do anything to encourage or discourage religion, which really puts them in a weird spot. because churches are given tax-exempt status, which could argue, well, that's encouraging religion by not making them pay taxes. But if you tax them, then you could argue, well, that's discouraging religion because you're making them pay taxes. So it really puts them in a schizophrenic position because it doesn't make any sense. So.
People have also gone really weird with that because of that tax exempt status. So I heard in one college, somebody wanted to claim that their house was holy then, and they called it off defiance. So they worshiped the noodles in the sky and the great colander.
And did they win?
Yes.
I mean, that's.
They even went as far as taking the Lord's Prayer and making it some sort of weird gospel thing.
Anyway, the liberal interpretation is very, very strange and crazy. So anyway, questions about what it really meant. I mean, I think it's worth thinking about what it meant. It was meant to keep the national level from picking a religion. They wanted to protect Massachusetts' freedom to have an established religion. Or Virginia, if they wanted to flip back and go to Anglican, they could do that. All right, they was wanting to protect that right. So, okay, next thing we need to get to, and this is pages 3 through 9, is establishing the government. All right, we have at this point documents, a piece of paper written on it about how the government's supposed to operate, and that's all it is. All right. Those in the U.S. Constitution, we talked about how do you understand the Constitution. It's just Tamar and Zachary in there. You're not in Constitution? You're in Constitution. Just Tamar, so I hope you remember. Why did I think you were in Constitution? I don't know. I think I remember that thorn in my mind. To understand the Constitution, read it, put it in its historical context, and that, and then, but there's, it's just a piece of paper, all right? It's just a piece of paper. The people of the country had to actually put this thing into practice. It'd be like me giving you a piece of paper describing how you're supposed to do papers and turn them into me. Right? It's just a piece of paper. You've got to take that thing and actually come up with a paper that meets those guidelines. Okay, so we had to put this thing together. So that's what I meant here by establishing the government. We had to go from a piece of paper that described how this was supposed to happen to actually having a president with cabinet members and a military, and this whole mechanism had to be put together. So, all right, first point I have is some acts passed by Congress. Congress passes some laws here to initially create some things, which is appropriate. It had to come through them. All right, two particular things. First of all, they establish 5 executive departments, 5 agencies that worked for the president, is the way to think of that. Right, the Constitution talks about the heads of these agencies and what they can do, but the president isn't at liberty to just make them as he wants. Congress has to create them. So they did. 5 of them, if you want the 5, it was the Department of State. Thomas Jefferson was put in there. The Department of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton. And the original name for the next one was the War Department. We've softened it to the Department of Defense today. The War Department, Henry Knox was there. Attorney General, Edmund Randolph. You can maybe think what was next. To me, this one doesn't seem to fit, other than it's mandated by the Constitution that we have this thing.
Department of Agriculture?
No, that was not mandated by the Constitution. So, the last one is the Postmaster General, a post office. The Constitution does actually say Congress needs to establish the postal system and roads to carry the mail. So the Postmaster General, Samuel Osgood. Not quite as well known as Jefferson or Hamilton, but Postmaster General. Okay, so now we have Congress creating these agencies, the president able to appoint these men to head them up, and then they began to put together a post office. The Attorney General began to hire staff and secretaries and a place to meet, and began to put these agencies together. Right. The second piece of legislation we get from Congress here at the start is one that sets up the court system. Right. I don't know the name for the first one. This is the Judiciary Act of 1789. sets up a court system. Here, a national court system. There were already state and local courts. This set up a national level. What we think of today as the federal courts, right? Set them up. This was the original breakup of it. The Supreme Court was given 6 justices. The Supreme Court is mandated by the Constitution. They didn't have the authority to decide not to have that, but they did get to decide exactly how many people were going to be on it and that time. So 6 justices on the Supreme Court, and then every state was given a federal court. Federal district court is what we would call them today, but one of these national level courts was established in every state. So how many of those state courts were there? Stephanie says 13. Anybody disagree? Agree? So there were 13 of those. So. Okay, so then we had a court system, at least the framework began. The president can then begin appointing justices to be on the Supreme Court, begin appointing justices to fill up all of the federal state courts, and begin to get the process going. Okay, so we have legislation from Congress authorizing these things to happen, which needed to happen. All right, the next thing to look at is the financial plan. The financial plan. We saw under the critical period, one of the problems that we faced was economic problems. Right? We faced that anyway. We said we had financial problems, we had foreign affairs problems, and we had the articles that were so weak we couldn't handle them. Here, it's that same economic problem, but now we have a central government with enough authority to begin to really address these problems. Okay, so the financial plan here, the guy who orchestrates this is Alexander Hamilton. It's referred to as Hamilton's plan. Okay, let me give you his plan here in 4 pieces. The first main point was the debt was going to be paid back in full. And we owed money from the war to manufacturers, to soldiers, to foreign countries. All that money was going to be paid back in full. There was some call to not pay back some of the money owed to the soldiers, and it's not what it sounds like. It's, who wouldn't want to pay the soldiers? There were a lot of soldiers in the critical period who saw the disarray in the government, its inefficiency, who took these. You can think of these soldiers having an IOU from the government. We owe you this much money, and we'll pay you at some point in the future. Maybe it was $5,000, and it'll go to some evil, greedy banker. Jacob, weren't you the one talking about Pastor Darren? They'd go to somebody and say, I'll give you this $5,000 promise from the government if you just give me $2,000 now, and whenever the government pays back the $5,000, you'll get the full $5,000. These people are not in favor. They're called speculators. When people like them, they're called investors. So anyway, Jacob is the speculator in this point. And it's estimated that about 75% of that money owed to the soldiers had actually been shifted in this fashion. So there's a lot of people who said, oh no, we can't reward the speculators for ripping off the soldiers. Right? That was the argument. It doesn't hold any water. The government still owed the money. All right? If I borrow $1,000 from Jacob, and Jacob shifts it to somebody else, they give him $200, and I still owe $1,000. It doesn't relieve it from me, right? And that was the stance here taken by our government. We're going to pay it all back. Okay, so on one sense you say pay it all back. Duh, of course. But there was that controversy, and people legitimately calling for it not to be called back. And Hamilton here, with Washington's approval, said we're going to pay it all back. Okay? The actual mechanics of how that happened is the government reissued bonds that would be paid back over 15 to 20 years. So basically they reissued new IOU statements. So who was a soldier that sold your money to Jacob? Let's pick Gregory, while we're being fanciful. You owed $5,000. you give it to Jacob and you get $2,000 and you go run and have a good life. Jacob here, who's owed $5,000 now, the government gives him another bond, another piece of paper saying they're going to pay him back, and it sets up a program over 15 to 20 years for him to slowly get repaid that money. So, all right, the point is, all the debt repaid, really the only right thing to do. The money was owed. So, all right, the next thing, revenue. Somehow the government had to make money. I shouldn't call it revenue, taxes. Liberals talk about revenue enhancement measures and things like that, which just means they're going to tax you more. All right, there were two types of taxes set up here. The first was an import tax, a tax on goods brought into the country. All right, and the other was an excise tax. That is a tax on it was an excise tax on whiskey, but a tax on something that is made, produced, sold, and consumed within the country. Whiskey, the farmers would grow the corn, distill it into whiskey, and sell it all within the country. It doesn't ever leave boundaries to go to another country where it can be taxed or something. It's just made and consumed within the country. So a tax on that. So there was a tax on whiskey. Which results in a rebellion. It's called the Whiskey Rebellion in 1794. And it wasn't just a bunch of drunken bums that didn't want to pay more money for their liquor. I'm sure that element was there, but really at the heart of the rebellion was a bunch of farmers who lived in the Western territories. And to get their crops to market, they would turn it into whiskey. Just because it took so long to get to market, it would spoil and be bad if they didn't. So they would turn it all to whiskey, ship it to the states or to the cities and sell the whiskey. And that was how they were making their living. So all of a sudden, these farmers on the frontier are being hit with this tax. And they rise up against it. Washington actually sends troops out to quell this thing. He, as commander-in-chief, actually is on the field for a little bit here, directly organizing the troops. So it peters out, and there's not a major battle between the whiskey farmers and the federal government. But it does instigate a little bit of problem. So, all right, so taxes. He's going to pay the debt off. He's going to raise money through the import tax and the whiskey tax. All right, the next piece is the national bank. This one stirs up some controversy, and it does for several decades. It's an ongoing argument about whether or not this thing is legal or not. So a national bank, what it did basically was create a new bank that would handle all of the financial transactions of the government. Right? This bank was privately owned, privately run. The U.S. government was a 20% shareholder in the bank. They owned 20% of it. The other 80% was private entities. But it was given the authority and power to handle all the financial transactions of the government. So the money that was collected from the farmers would be deposited here. The money collected on the import tariffs would be deposited here. If when Jacob was paid back his $5,000 of ill-gotten gain from speculating. I'm saying that in jest. Today, people like him are maligned. I mean, he should be, but not because of that. But when he's getting ready to pay back his money, this bank issues the check to get it. So it handles all those financial transactions. So one other thing that it had the power to do that isn't just a normal thing is that it also issued paper money. Right? So it would actually print the money that is circulated and used as cash. There are restrictions on how much it could print. It had to actually have the money on hand, the actual hard currency on hand to print the paper money. So to handle all those transactions for the government. So this national bank stirred up all kinds of argument and debate. And it really goes on and off here for a couple decades. Sometimes we have it, sometimes we don't. And it was really, the argument was about whether or not it was constitutional. Here, this is something Congress had to create, but nowhere does it explicitly say Congress has the power to create a bank. And that's at the heart of it. Congress is given power to lay and collect taxes, to pay the debts, to establish a uniform currency. Congress is given powers to do that thing. And then there's a clause at the end of this list of all the powers that Congress has that says they can do things that are necessary and proper to get those jobs done. You know, like they have the authority to hunt down counterfeiters. Does it mean that members of Congress have to actually wander the countryside looking for counterfeit money? Or can they create an agency that will go do that for them? All right, so there's not any explicit authority to create an agency to hunt down counterfeiters, but it would be necessary and proper to do that. Okay, so the argument was whether or not this bank was necessary and proper. Is it okay within the general flavor of the Constitution for Congress to create this bank so that it can have some way to collect taxes, hold the money, pay bills, establish uniform currency, and all of that? Some way to do that. Anyway, and it goes back and forth. Jefferson, who was on Washington's staff, argued against it. He thought that this was a violation of the Constitution. Hamilton, who was also on Washington's staff, argued for it. And they go back and forth. Jefferson becomes president, and he tanks this thing as president. And then there's some financial problems that come up, and it gets revived. So it goes back and forth. So this debate goes on for a while. There's a term that comes up here that I should at least mention to you. It's strict, I guess it's two terms, strict or loose construction of the Constitution. Jefferson argued for a strict construction. We're going to stick very, very closely to the exact words of the Constitution. And Hamilton argued for a loose construction, saying, well, that necessary and proper clause, it gives us enough leeway that even though the bank is not explicitly written down in the list of powers of Congress, we think it's necessary and proper. So, unless we think that these guys were never influenced by politics, all right. When Jefferson is president, he buys, half of the continent in Louisiana Purchase, and nowhere in the Constitution does it explicitly say Congress can buy large chunks of land like that from other countries. Can anybody guess what Jefferson argued at that point? He argued loose construction at that point. So sometimes I look back and see all these guys are just pure and unmotivated by selfish things. No, right? All right. When it was in his favor, he argued loose construction. So anyway, the bank in my mind is completely fine if we had to have a spectrum. So this is the Constitution, and this is where we are today. Us. These guys are arguing about two positions over here. I mean, we're so far from where liberals argue today about the Constitution. I mean, today the Constitution says that two of you guys have the right to get married, and you girls have the right to claim your guy and go into the guy's locker room. That never happens. It's always the guy that goes in the girl. Anyway. But anyway, I mean, liberals are arguing today when people talk about, we want to stick tightly to the Constitution. We're talking about stuff way over here. This is an argument way over on that side here. I could take either one of these and it'd be a vast improvement of at least they're actually looking at the words of the Constitution and trying to decide what they mean, not just over here talking about literally the shadow cast by the Constitution and things that fall in that shadow. That's the argument, basically, for some of these things. So, okay, list. Strict and loose construction. Questions about that? Okay, that was the third piece of Hamilton's plan here. Pay the debt off, tax people, create a bank. The fourth piece, this never makes it, and I'm extremely glad it never made it. He proposed a mercantilistic system of trade and manufacturing. Remember the colonial time frame? We talked about mercantilism, and what's the shorthand version of mercantilism?
You always want to get more money than the other countries.
Okay, that's true. That's true. I was thinking of another phrase. Government control, and that's our government control. He proposes this thing, restrictions about what ships can be used and what can be manufactured. Right. It gets rejected, all right, but he does propose it. So, all right, the last point is just that Congress approves all of this except for the mercantilism. All right. Going back to the critical period. We had the articles that made it such a horrible time. And then on top of that, we had the economic problems, which Hamilton here helps address those problems. What was the other major area of concern that caused that period to be so critical? You're allowed to look back, or I did just mention them.
Shays Rebellion.
Okay, Shays Rebellion, but there's one other thing.
Foreign problems.
Foreign problems, okay? And that's the next point here. We have establishing the government. We have the first acts of Congress actually creating these pieces. We have the economic plan that addresses the economic problems, not that we're out of the woods yet. It'd be like you getting yourself in thousands of dollars of debt and sitting down and writing down a plan to pay it off, right? At least we were on the road to get it paid off, right? The other major area is foreign problems or foreign affairs. I've got it. And there's a whole list here, pages 4 through 9, of foreign affairs running through, about the first 30 years or so of the country here. I will try to, if I think about it, give you the president, but here I used to look at these separately with the president, but I think it makes more sense to look at them all together because it really was the country grappling with these foreign problems and trying to come up with some way to settle them. So we're going to keep talking here just because of time's sake. I think we'll stop the test right there. There's no way we're going to get through the foreign affairs. But rather than stop halfway through this, we'll just save the whole thing for the next test. So, but please continue to listen because the stuff will be on the next test. So, all right, let's just get started into these foreign affairs for 10 or 15 minutes, and then we'll talk about the test on Monday. So, all right, the first thing is Spain. Spain. We had an issue to deal with Spain. We got a treaty signed in 1795 called the Pinckney Treaty. Pinckney Treaty, 1795. In the Treaty of Paris that recognized us as free and independent, Spain was given Florida and that territory to the south, but there was no real boundary. It wasn't clear. So what this basically did was create that boundary. They were given Florida, and we were getting everything north of Florida, but exactly where did you leave Florida and enter Georgia? That was not clear. All right, so this treaty here in 1795 established that southern border. If you want a particular, it was the 31st parallel running across there, still that northern border of Florida running across there. That was established. Okay, and it was a treaty. We didn't go to war over this thing. We were able to go to them, negotiate, and establish this thing. There was one other provision in this treaty that is significant. We were also guaranteed the right of deposit in New Orleans and free access to the Mississippi River. Anybody know what right of deposit is? It has nothing to do with your paycheck getting put in the bank. It has to do with trade. Thomas looks a little bit more awake than he was before, but just a little bit. Justin looks like he might want to answer. No? Okay. He's trying to decide if he's awake. Okay, more than just trade with them, we could use the harbor and use warehouses and the facilities of the harbor. Have some ocean-going ship comes into the harbor, they could unload their cargo, store it in the warehouses, etc., transfer it onto ships going up the river, use the port in that sense. It's called right of deposit, right? Extremely needed if we're going to have any real trade. And very quickly, I don't have the number here, but somewhere around a half or so of our trade goes down to Mississippi and out through New Orleans. I mean, we get a ton of manufacturing and stuff going out this way. So this rye deposit is extremely important. They control that very bottom half of the Mississippi from the Pinckney Treaty, but this guaranteed us free access up through to the Mississippi and the rye deposit there in New Orleans. You might be thinking, oh, why, who cares about New Orleans? Just go someplace and stop your boat and unload it. It'd be like saying, well, who needs a fancy hydraulic jack? We could just, use to lift your car up. We could just use sticks and levers, and you can get it picked up, but it's much harder. Right? It's much easier when you have a facility there and equipment to unload things into. It made it much, much easier. So anyway, rye deposit in New Orleans and free access up the Mississippi. All right, so the Pinckney Treaty with Spain, that was 1795. That was Washington that negotiated that thing. All right, the next thing to talk about is the Barbary Pirates, their first war against the Muslims. This is under Jefferson. B-A-R-B-A-R-Y. Barbary Pirates. All right, these guys are just what it sounds like. They're pirates. They lived on the north coast of Africa. If you think of where Spain is, just go kind of straight across from that into Africa. I'm trying to think of the Libya, Tunisia, and around that way is mostly where we're talking about. All right. They were Muslim pirates. The tradition was, and lots of other countries did this, was for countries to pay these pirates some money every year for them to just leave their ships alone. England, France, other countries would just pay them money every year, and it was a small enough charge that the other countries, it wasn't worth it to them to send their navy down there to attack these guys. It was easier. Just pay this thing off. It's basically a bribe. Pay it off, and everybody kind of at least lived with it. We did the same thing, all right? We pay this little bits of money to guarantee free trade through the area. That changes when one of those pirates, one of those small little states there, the country of Tripoli, raised the amount that they wanted. You ever heard stories about killing the goose that lays the golden eggs or something? They wanted more from us, right? And it put us over the edge. So Jefferson, here as president, sends over warships to the area. And we have an unofficial war there from 1801 to 1805. It's called the Tripolitan War that we fight successfully against Tripoli. And in the end, we stopped making those payments to Tripoli. We still made payments to the other Barbary pirates, but Tripoli was cut out of the deal 1805. Tripolitan War, 1801 to 1805. A man named Stephen Decatur earns fame in that war. Anyway, Barbary pirates. Questions about that?
What did the guy do that made him famous?
He was able to take an American ship, it was an older ship, and sell it into the main harbor and sink it right across the mouth of the harbor, which sounds like no big deal, but he's under fire. He ends up getting captured. The Tripolitan commander of the city even talked about the bravery and this amazing feat that he pulled off. So that was at the heart of it. Okay, Barbary pirates. Let's talk about England next. I think we'll just talk about England here initially. The next main section of this, still talking about these foreign affairs, is France. And we get a whole lot of stuff out of France. They're in the middle of the French Revolution. There's a whole swirl of activities that come out of that. So I think we'll save that for later. At this point, let's just talk about what's going on with England. There's two main things that come out of England. All right, the first involves the western parts of America. At this point would be where we live. the Midwest region. England continued to, after the after the Treaty of Paris and after independence, they continued to encourage the Indians to attack us in these regions. They even still occupied some forts and places over here. And they would pay Indians money for U.S. American scalps and things like that. There's a guy called the Hair Buyer, was his nickname by the Americans. So they're still there instigating problems. So Washington eventually sends our army out there under a man named Anthony Wayne. He's got a much more colorful nickname. Mad Anthony Wayne. Does anybody know the Indian nickname? I might butcher it. Something along the line of the general who never sleeps. Because the Indians said he always had the troops training and drilling. They never stopped and just slept, is the claim. But anyway, Mad Anthony Wayne is sent to the area 1794, and he defeats the main group of Indians at the Battle of Fallen Timbers. Northern Ohio. Can anybody guess what the terrain was like at the Battle of Fallen Timbers? Jacob's looking at me like, I know the answer, but I can't tell if it's just sleep, deprivation, or if you know the answer. A tornado had come through and knocked down a bunch of trees, so there was actually fallen timber all over the place. So it made it extremely exciting to try to move on horseback through the air with all these trees down everywhere. So Battle of Fallen Timbers, we win that thing, Northern Ohio, and that really ends the main Indian threat at this point. After this battle, the British pull out of the area. The Indians who hate us retreat out of the area, and it settles the main fight. So,
What year was that?
1794. Okay, the other thing to talk about with England is the Jay Treaty. This is 1795 as well. We already had the Pinckney Treaty in 1795 with Spain. Charles Pinckney is looked at as a hero, you know, not quite ticker tape parades, but a hero. Jay is maligned and ridiculed. Not quite so well here. So, but Jay Treaty, this is a treaty with England. All right, which is a very, very different situation than a treaty with Spain. Spain had been on our side, really, in the fight. England is the enemy. Right? So this is not too long after the war. We negotiate with them. First of all, let me give you some reasons for tension and continued problems here. So one of the problems was England not complying with the Treaty of Paris. At the end of the war, we talked about it, really the problems in the West were part of that, not abandoning their forts. There were other provisions, some minor provisions. They hadn't fulfilled all of the things they'd agreed to. So that was an ongoing point of tension. Second thing England was doing was capturing a lot of American trading vessels. They were, by this point, into the struggles with France. So here, right around 1794, 1795, they captured about 250 American trading ships. We'll just talk about one or two, a significant number. Okay, and the third thing England was doing was impressing American sailors into their navy. Anybody know what that word impressment means at this point? We try to impress people into our Navy. We put up posters of these really strong, buff-looking guys, join the Navy. But it's very, very different. Yes?
They would capture them and claim that they were friendlies.
Yeah. They would just capture them and force them into the Navy. They would do things like go to a bar in the harbor and get a bunch of guys drunk, take them to their boat and sail out to sea. And when the guys woke up, they were in the British Navy. And at that point, if they resisted, they shot them for insubordination. So you were forced into this thing. So England was impressing American citizens into their Navy. Now, to be fair to England, they did this to their own citizens. Right? So they weren't just picking on us, but it was a very different situation. These were not British citizens anymore. These were American citizens, and they were impressing them into their Navy. So, okay, those things are boiling, and Washington sends Jay to England to negotiate a treaty. And here's what the treaty did. It didn't address a lot of the problems, and that's why Jay is maligned at the time. But really, in retrospect, England is the world power. We can't expect them, just because we send somebody over to negotiate, to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, we'll start being nice." It wasn't a realistic expectation. So, this is what the treaty said. First of all, America agreed to pay back some British citizens. I mean, some things going back to the time of the Revolution. Some British citizens who had some property destroyed. We agreed to pay that back. And then England agreed to do 3 things. Agreed to abandon their forts in the Northwest Territory, which that also was part of the Treaty of Paris that they'd already agreed. So they were re-agreeing to do that. By this point, they had lost to Anthony Wayne, so those forts were not nearly as crucial to them. They agreed to pay back American merchants who had lost their ships, them capturing our ships. And then they agreed to open up some ports to American trade. All right, they had been completely barring our ships from any of their harbors, so agreed to open up some ports. Now, that does not address the impressment of sailors and other things. Doesn't really directly address the fact that they had been encouraging and paying the Indians to attack us. There's a whole lot of things that were not specifically addressed. But it was not a war. We were not in a position to go to war with England at this point. We do in about 15, 20 years. But at this point, we're not really in a position to do that. So, all right, Jay here really is maligned. He claimed that he could travel the country at night by the light of the burning effigies of him, people making dummies that look like him and burning them in the town square. He claimed that was enough light to travel across the country. There's so many of those. So, okay, so that's an unfair criticism. Unfair criticism, Jay. All right, some troubles with England there at the beginning. The next section really is all with France and problems that come out of the French Revolution and the struggles between France and England. So we'll save that whole package for after Thanksgiving. Wow.